and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my real top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America.
Welcome to this edition of Voice Rebellion Radio. I am your host, Chris J. Here at Voice Rebellion Radio, here at the one and only UCY.TV. Today I am unaccompanied in the studio, just being me, as I talk about a couple of recent developments in the news. We had pretty much on Monday the declaration by the United States government officially declaring Venezuela to be a dictatorship now. Meanwhile, they continue to support and deny the dictatorial government that is the regime in Riyadh. They pretty much deny that it's a dictatorship, even though it is a dictatorship. It is the only country really like it in the world when it comes to how backwards the type of human rights abuses, violations are committed by the Saudi government on the regular basis. In Venezuela, we are officially witnessing now, since the United States making its final encroachment possibly on Venezuela, as now they've pretty much put Venezuela in the same class according to the standards as like North Korea, Zimbabwe, countries that have been under the constant scrutiny of the United States and the West for years on end. And what happened in Venezuela is that Sunday they had their vote for the Constituent Assembly, which the Constituent Assembly is starting a new process where the people of Venezuela will have the ability to input on how they will rewrite the Constitution. And pretty much now they're going ahead on rewriting the Constitution. Unlike the United States, they do not do amendments in Venezuela. They'll just pretty much make a new one from scratch, I guess, even though they'll probably be, of course, taking parts from the other constitutions through the past, including the current constitution. However, the new constitution will be a new constitution of its own. And this was part of a kind of a plea by the government to the opposition in order to try to bring peace to the country, as they've now been in the face of crippling riots, major protests inside of Venezuela. Of course, a lot of it's hype. A lot of it's not as bad as the media's claimed, the situation in Venezuela, but however, there's been major problems, and it's being caused by different factors than what the media has told you that the situation in Venezuela is being caused by. Venezuela's government proposed this idea this summer, which ironically last summer the opposition proposed. However, now this time that the government proposed the Constituent Assembly idea, now the opposition was opposed to it. This was one of the biggest victories of the Bolivarian government has ever faced, as they had many people voted for Constituent Assembly, as voted for Hugo Chavez in 2012. So about 8 million people voted for the Constituent Assembly. This is definitely a major showing by the people that they do not want a fast and quick coup like I think the opposition wants, is that they want to take power covertly and they want to take power overnight. They don't want to win. I don't even think they want to win by elections, because it seems like all the elections that they face, they lose, with the exception of the 2015 election for the parliament, which they took major gains in that. And pretty much by some tinkering, were able to take a supermajority of the National Assembly by 2016 when they were all sworn in. However, when they did take the supermajority, they did not win a supermajority according to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did say that two of their seats were invalid, that they had won. Originally, it was supposed to be just a majority, which I think about 64% of the National Assembly being taken by the MUD, but however, it ended up being over two-thirds, which is a supermajority, and the supermajority is enough to call for, I think, a recall referendum on its own. Is that with that many people there, they could call the recall referendum, which hasn't happened yet. And they tried very hard to 2016 to call recall referendum, but however, they was not quite able to get enough public support for the recall referendum for Nicolas Maduro, who is still now the president of Venezuela and will be the president of Venezuela. It appears until 2018 when the presidential elections happen. Earlier this year, we had reports. We've had all these different reports of these apocalyptic scenes practically in Venezuela. And we've seen throughout the year a lot of these major riots and police and protesters clashing. And a lot of this is opposition and violence that's causing these disruptions in Venezuela. We've seen the opposition attack maternity wards, attack government buildings, set buses on fire, set people on fire. By all means, these people should be labeled, these people that commit these acts, right-wing terrorists. No different than the same kind of like right-wing terrorists that we've seen commit attacks in the United States. This is extremist ideology, and these people are committing terrible acts of violence to push their political agenda. And their political agenda being pretty much ushering in fascism, like what they had prior to the Chavez government. They had a fascist government. Andres Perez was a fascist who suppressed the left wing of the country via mass by use of violence. They killed like 3,000 protesters, possibly at the Carazaco, which was in 1989. So Venezuela has had a history of fascism. In fact, some of these people that are in the MUD party today are like leftovers from the 90s corrupt government, the 80s corrupt government. For example, Ramus Ayub is one of these people. And people say it's an exaggeration to call these people fascists, but I think by all definitions they were fascists, just the same definition that Pinochet was fascist, who is much more widely called a fascist and is more known for his fascist tendencies. People like Pinochet, the Argentinian military junta, is also more widely called fascist. The Venezuelan government of the 70s through 90s. On top of that, there was, the Brazilian government, I think is like also one of the governments is lesser known to being called fascist, but they're all part of the Operation Condor of the CIA backing these right-wing dictatorships in an effort to quell revolutionary activity across the continent, South America. Was as many as millions of victims were affected by Operation Condor. 60,000 in Chile alone were slain by the government of Chile under the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. There's also dictatorships in Ecuador, I believe. There was dictatorship in Uruguay where one of the recent presidents, Jose Mujica, was thrown in prison for 35 years, I believe, for rebel activity in the 1960s by the military. It was at one point with a military dictatorship in Uruguay. We also had in Bolivia, I believe it was at one point. Bolivia was a dictatorship at one point, and in fact they had a lot of interference from the man Klaus Barbie. Klaus Barbie was actually a ex-Nazi who had at one point like a Nazi paramilitary that they were using to utilize to sway politics in the country. He helped with the CIA capture Che Guevara in 1980, was helping the CIA topple a left-wing government in order to put in a dictatorship once again in Bolivia. And we've seen the history of this, is that there was attempts prior to 1998, the real resurgence of Chavez, the pink tide came out, the resurgence of left-wing activity in South America. We saw attempts and different governments that were short-lived that were left-wing throughout South America that they deposed throughout time. You had people like Jacobo Arbenz, who was deposed by the CIA in 1964. We've seen multiple governments like this that this happened to, and similar fates, and the CIA determining the fates of these countries. And that's what they're trying to do with Venezuela today, and trying to revert it back to the days of the Operation Condor government. And these people are definitely agent provocateurs who are on the streets of Caracas protesting. I do not believe this to be a legitimate, total grassroots movement like is being claimed currently by the United States media. And, they kicked out CNN not too long ago, which was a smart move because CNN pushing their lies and propaganda to the people have been able to convince a lot of Venezuelans that things are happening, they're not actually happening. I think one of the biggest lies might be that the Venezuelan government's involved with the narco-trafficking trade. When ultimately, the people that are actually involved in the narco-trafficking trade are the United States government and United States allies. And this is long proved. This is the country, it's kind of, people actually believe the media of the country or of the government that have been long proved now to have been involved, and they practically have admitted to it, all the stuff about the 80s drug trade, being involved between this, the terrible alliance between the drug traffickers, right-wing paramilitaries, and the United States government that existed in South America. And you had, like Manuel Noriega and so many other top drug kingpins that the United States government was involved with, including Pablo Escobar, who Pablo Escobar's son said that his father worked with the CIA. I think all the evidence is there and all the pieces are there that people should be able to realize that Pablo Escobar, all these different drug kingpins definitely worked with the United States government. Now it's no longer really a conspiracy theory. And, the same government is going to try to claim that Venezuela is involved with drug trafficking, when I believe that to be a lie. Is that Venezuela, there's definitely been some competence on the Venezuelan government, and that's probably that's the main thing that they're guilty of. And one of the mistakes that they made, and I think this is Ken Livingstone of the Labor Party said this, is that they didn't get rid of the oligarchs, is that Chavez didn't totally get rid of the oligarchs in Venezuela, now they're wreaking havoc. Unlike what Putin did, is that pretty much he totally dismantled the entire oligarch class in Russia, and now they haven't been able to wreak havoc, and things have been pretty stable, and it'll probably be the same thing for a successor. Which right now, actually, the odd thing is we're in August right now. The elections, I think, are in March for the next Russian president, and Vladimir Putin has actually not announced whether he's going to run again. He's said, however, in a major step forward that he's now going to consider it. While he seems to have gave no indication of running again, there's a high possibility, I think, that Vladimir Putin might be hanging him up when it comes March or, May, is actually when they're sworn in, and he might be about to pass over the torch to Shoigu, possibly, his Minister of Defense. There's multiple people that are probably candidates to be the next Russian president, but there's a high chance that Vladimir Putin, 1966 in next October, might not want to run again, and that he's retiring. Otherwise, by the time he is done with his fourth term total, this will be in 2024. By the time he's done with that, he'll be the age of 71. He'll be 71 by the time that his last term runs out in 2024. I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin wants to continue working to that point. But anyways, get a little bit off track of what I was talking about with Venezuela. Venezuela, we are seeing the effects. The oligarch class of Venezuela, the elite, are trying to push this chaos, and you have supermarket chains that are hostile to the Maduro government, are hoarding food in order to try to disrupt the food process in the country. It's definitely happening. It's definitely it's definitely not. I don't. The people are trying to say, and a lot of critics towards the Venezuelan regime, I try to say that it's economic mismanagement, and that alone has caused the problems in Venezuela. That'd be foolish to say that alone is causing the problems in Venezuela, not the sabotage, not the economic sanctions. So many external factors that are playing a part of this. Ultimately, the United States has been trying to overthrow their government. They tried to overthrow the government in 2002 in a coup attempt that failed. They tried to overthrow the government in 2015. They're trying again, it looks like, or they're about to try again. Maybe another coup attempt might be on the horizon. Of course, we also saw the heavily publicized coup attempt in 2002 that were really, it gained Chavez a lot of popularity because prior to the coup attempt in 2002, Chavez actually only enjoyed about 30% May support or so. However, afterwards, he gained the hearts of a lot of people with the coup attempt, and ultimately the United States and Spain being mostly responsible for the coup attempt in Venezuela were unsuccessful, unlike when they did do the coup attempt against Allende and they put in Pinochet. They were trying to put in Carmona, which was an oil businessman who eventually fled and went in exile in Colombia. However, Carmona, I think, people like him, they should have been arrested. They shouldn't have been allowed to flee. And, they shouldn't have really, I think that some of the people that were involved with the coup attempt were actually allowed, were not even forced to flee or spend any time in prison. And that was part of the problem, is that the oligarchs and the people that are, troublesome people of Venezuela, people that were willing to collaborate with the banks, were not punished, and they pretty much just got another chance to do it again. Now, it's been 15 years, believe it or not, since the coup attempt. That was in 2002. And, Venezuela's government seems to be on its fringes at this point. As it's right now, it seems that in 2018, the election, if it was held today, and by what the polls show, we all know that polls are not very accurate. However, if the polls were accurate, and it would show the potentially a probably a pretty big win for the MUD. Probably that's whoever their candidate is winning. However, earlier this year we had Enrique Capriles, one of the main nemesis to the Venezuelan government, and ultimately, I would say, American poster boy. I think for, it was a questionable call by the government, but he was pretty much just banned from being in politics at this point. It's questionable because, of course, it looks like a suppression of democracy. However, this man he's part of an opposition that is not interested in democracy. Leopoldo Lopez, for example, people will say that he was unfairly jailed. I believe that he deserved to be jailed, that his actions have resulted in much violence. And I think Capriles, to an extent, has also resulted in violence. I mean, he also had Capriles has said really ridiculous remarks. At one time he said that Pinochet was a democratic man for the people. This is a man totally out of touch with the reality of the politics in his own continent. And Enrique Capriles, there's actually rumors that he wasn't even born in Venezuela. He was born in Colorado. Now, I don't know if I believe that, but however, I think that it does show, a lot of the people in Venezuela don't trust him, so I don't think he would even be much of a worry to be voted in. And that's the thing with the opposition, is that they might have a decent amount of support for the movement as a whole against the Venezuelan government, but however, the amount of support for any particular person on the opposition seems to be pretty low. And that's why I think that the opposition may never win an election, because the Capriles-Radonsky might have been the most popular candidate, and now he can't run, and he never could win an election. He faced 2 elections. In fact, he faced one against Maduro himself after Chavez died, and he narrowly lost in 2013. And it appears the same thing could happen if even if Capriles was to run against Maduro, it might have been another narrow loss in 2018, which the election is towards the end of next year. So we have a year plus of talking about this before, we don't know who might run against Nicolas Maduro or whoever runs in the place of the party, the PSUV. There's a good chance that Maduro might be stepping down because of the name kind of being tarnished by all this bad things that have happened during his presidency, not really to his fault, but by the United States government, Israeli government, the people that are influencing the politics of Venezuela from abroad. So that might be a reason why the PSUV might have to run somebody else. There's potential that they might run the more popular Diosdado Cabello, who was originally seen as successor to Chavez. However, it was kind of by a surprise move in December 2012 that Chavez said that he would want Maduro to run if anything was to happen to him, which he would die 3 months later from the cancer that he was originally diagnosed in June of 2011. And Nicolas Maduro ran in April of 2013 in the special election because Chavez died in his first term. The vice president didn't automatically take over. They held a new general election, and Maduro won. So Chavez is forced. Technically, we're really in like Chavez's fourth term right now, or what it would have been Chavez's fourth term if he would have not died. Chavez who was elected in October of 2012, would be serving out the rest all the way up to 2018. However, Maduro is now carrying out the rest of that term, Chavez's fourth term. So, which practically was an entire term, and now by the next year, this will be the end of the term. So he has about one more year left of the term, and then they'll do another 6-year term, and then until 2024 will be the next term, unless the Constitution has changed with this whole Constituent Assembly process. They might go to shorter 4-year terms, perhaps. Who knows what they'll do? Perhaps they'll have term limits will be installed, which that's one thing about Venezuela is that they don't have term limits. Theoretically, Maduro or Chavez is still alive. He could have kept running 5, 6, 7, 8 terms if he wanted to. And I believe Chavez could have at least won one more election if he would have stayed alive. He could have won in 2018, I believe. Perhaps after that point, maybe they would want to see a new face there. But Maduro could theoretically run again. But I think for the sake of his own party, for the sake of the Bolivarian revolution as a whole, he ought to step down and let somebody else from his party run in his place. And I don't think that Maduro was the best candidate. He's not exactly as competent predecessor. And, let's face it, this guy's literally, he's a bus driver he used to be a bus driver he rose up the ranks. However, I don't know if he's really presidential material to deal with the threats that Venezuela is dealing with on a daily basis nowadays in these troubling times. And Maduro might have been able to run Venezuela in some of its more peaceful times. However, right now it's in crisis mode. He's done an all right job for all the things that he's had to face. However, it's time that the people of it's time that the people in the PSUV try to find somebody new and start putting them out there to campaign for 2018. And I think that really it's anybody but Maduro. Any more popular people. I think Diosdado Cabello would almost be a cinch because the opposition it's not in their favor because they don't really have somebody that they can, is really known that can run. I think that what they could put if she's out of prison, that's one of the big scandals that happened, and I've been talking about it on the news for a few days. That apparently Leopoldo Lopez, who was under house arrest, was taken from his home, and I think Ledesma, I think she might have been under house arrest. I think she was a former mayor of Caracas. I think she was taken from her home. Now, but I'm saying if she is able to run, there's a good chance that she could win. Leopoldo Lopez should under no circumstances be allowed to run anyways. He can't. He's under a 13-year prison sentence. There's no way that Leopoldo Lopez will be allowed to run in 2018. And, you do see like banners and stuff in Venezuela of Leopoldo. That's the thing. It's an odd dictatorship will allow banners of Leopoldo Lopez. You think that all the marketing and all of the advertisements would be only allotted to the socialist government, but that's not the case in Venezuela. And that's why the labeling of it of a dictatorship is absurd. Also, labeling Venezuela as a country with an unfree press is absurd. They have 60% of the media is anti-government there and is in favor of the opposition. A lot of the media is privately owned. A lot of the corporations there, unfortunately, still are privately owned, and I think that's what's caused a lot of the problems inside the country, is the oligarchs still having a lot of way over the economy. I don't think there's really a way to classify Venezuela as a dictatorship. And while they meanwhile continue relationship with Turkey, while Turkey, Erdogan was actually able to pass a referendum that increased his presidential powers. And they still, in fact, I think Trump actually congratulated him about it. And they still remain allied with Turkey. So this is the heavy hypocrisy that we hear there. They're going to call Turkey a dictator, or they're going to call Turkey an ally and Venezuela a dictatorship. Ultimately, one of the main reasons they are seeking to destabilize the Venezuelan government is the oil that is on Venezuela. That ultimately they have more oil than Saudi Arabia. And this angers the United States that they don't have a puppet no longer in place in Venezuela. Now, it's actually been that way almost 2 decades now. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of the Bolivarian Revolution. Chavez was elected, I think, October of 98 to power. So it's been 19 years that there's been since the Bolivarian Revolution. I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the younger people of Venezuela is that they don't remember a time before Chavez. So they don't remember the harder times of the 1980s and the early 1990s in Venezuela. So they can be easily influenced by the right wing of the country. They don't remember the struggles of the Carazaco in 1989, which you'd have to be pretty much a minimum of about 40 to really remember it happening now. That was 28 years ago, where about 3,000 protesters possibly might have been killed by the government of Andres Perez. They don't remember what led up to that, which is rising food prices. They don't remember they don't remember the repression of the government prior to that, and the incompetency of the government prior to Chavez. Is that really at this point, to remember a time prior to Chavez in any real extent, you have to be about 30 years old now, as it was 19 years ago when Chavez was elected. So let's say that you were, if you were just 11 years old at the time, now you're 30 years old. So the youngest, voters of the country between 18 and 30 don't really remember the time prior to Chavez. And, to remember some of those real struggles like they had in the 1980s, you might have to be 40 to 45 years old now to remember that. And also there's a sharp divide in the country economically. That, of course, a lot of the richer classes of the country want to support the opposition, while the poor of the country continues to support the Bolivarian Revolution, as a lot of them have directly benefited from the Bolivarian Revolution when it comes to education, medicine, and other things. However, the richer people of the country, when it comes to the richer, we talk about, middle class or upper middle class, the upper class of the country that, from the beginning have been pretty much enemies of the Bolivarian Revolution. A lot of them, were the ones that were peddling propaganda very early on in the regime, saying things along the lines that Chavez was a dictator, was a communist, and these kind of propaganda and lies that eventually caused the coup in 2000, or led up to the coup in 2002. The people of Venezuela, they had the big marches around the time of the coup, and that ultimately set the stage for the military to make their move. But however, there was still a part of the military that was loyal to Chavez, which were able to repel the coup. The thing is that I think that also the difference is that, and I worry about that Maduro, not being a military man, might not be as in touch with the military as Chavez was, and I think that's part of the reason why the coup failed, is because Chavez was a military man, was more in touch with the military. Cabellos is a military man himself, and that's why I think it potentially would be more beneficial to the country if they would have a man like Cabellos rather than Maduro, who is really, I guess you could say, more of a product of moving up the ranks, all the way from bus driver, now 30 years later, the president. But Trump has made a very tough stance against Venezuela, and he's met with people like Leopoldo Lopez's wife. He is definitely showing that he's not backing down on Venezuela, and I do fear that the United States may be concocting a plan, may using special forces, but potentially removing the government of Venezuela and flexing their muscle like they haven't done in decades when it comes to Latin America. And, we remember, some of the older listeners might remember, and I don't remember personally, but the story somewhat about what happened at the invasion of Grenada. And the invasion of Grenada was pretty much this on a smaller scale, potentially, of what happened in Venezuela, is that there was a government that was aligned with the Cubans in Grenada, and then ultimately it was overthrown by hardliners of the party. They were trying to say that they were building a runway for the Soviets, so it was going to be a staging ground for the Soviets. And then ultimately the United States went in there and invaded in 1984. They actually did suffer some losses. In fact, the story about the Navy SEALs that apparently they say they drowned out in the waters because their parachutes dragged them down. I think that was a lie. I think it was actually a story. What actually happened is that they got their heads cut off on the beaches, and there was also some Cuban construction workers were actually able to fight off the Americans pretty well. They did do some damage. However, the United States had a much more overwhelming force, and they were able to move on. However, some kind of move like that, like what they did in Grenada, but up to a larger scale, might happen in Venezuela. And what Grenada kind of symbolized, which was the first time that the United States military had any kind of real victory since the Vietnam fiasco. Is that Vietnam we lost, and there was a lot of doubts about the future of the United States military. This was the first time that the United States showed that they're really that the military was back, that they were back to victory. And right now we actually have Trump pretty much admitting that we're losing Afghanistan. And I would say that at this point, I don't even know what ultimately is the goal in Afghanistan, by what ways he talks about. Because if it goes by the United States banking interest in taking opium and getting oil, then it's probably all mostly a victory, what they're actually involved in there. When it comes to terrorism, that was never really our goal, I don't think, because the United States funds and finances terrorism all throughout the Middle East. But if you're going by that, of course you're losing the war. However, it appears that, but this is what Trump said, that we're losing Afghanistan. So perhaps this is a way of riding the ship of the United States military. This is going to be the next step, is that they're going to do some kind of invasion of Venezuela or some Latin American country in order to flex their muscle. But I think that at the same time, they're engaging and they're being cautious, because I think Bolivia's pledged their support in any kind of a United States invasion, that they would come in to help. They would not be alone if the United States was to come in to invade. And the United States is going to be really cautious of any kind of potential encroachment of Venezuela. And I think also potentially countries like Ecuador and other countries in the, I guess you could say, the Bolivarian alliance would be willing to help Venezuela if they are ever threatened by the United States. However, also, there's like another example. I was thinking back when the United States used force on a Latin American country in a similar manner, but it was a different situation. It was more like cleaning up the evidence when it came to Noriega. When they arrested Noriega in 1989, and they did the invasion at the pretty much was the end of the whole turbulent decade that was the 1980s. In December 1989, the United States deployed the military to Panama, and the Panamanian government was taken down. Noriega was taken to prison, and Noriega would end up spending 27 years in prison, and he died recently. I think he died about a couple months ago. He went to the American prison, then he was in a French prison, then he was in a Panamanian prison. But he was in a lot worse health recently. Like in, I think January, he slipped into a pretty bad state of health, and then he died a couple months ago. But the former narco collaborator of the United States, he was involved with the narco trafficking and connected to Pablo Escobar, most likely. So was the United States, is all connected in there, and I think that's what it was. Is that this is a cleanup of all the dirty cocaine dealing and all this drug trafficking that the United States was involved in the 1980s, that they finally they wanted to clean the evidence, get rid of the tapes, and move on. So Panama, they went in there and took out Noriega, but it's a little bit different than that, because Noriega, that was that. I think this would be more closer like Grenada, and the show of force is that this would be a trophy for Donald Trump if he could take out Nicolas Maduro. And I could see that this or Cuba is going to be one of the countries that he may pick to do this if he wants to waffle on the idea of going straight into Iran. However, I believe there was reports, I think I saw somewhere that Trump said that we're going to be at war, or he hinted that we're going to be at war with Iran by October, because he said that's not what he said was, I think that he said that Iran's going to break their deal by October, the nuclear deal that we signed with them a couple years ago, which that's pretty much saying war, because I think it's pretty much a condition is that if they break the nuclear deal, we're pretty much going to war, and that's pretty much what's been Trump's stance. And he believes that the nuclear deal is a total failure. He believes that this is us actually handing Iran $150 billion a year, and he believes us to be bowing down to Iran. He calls it the worst deal in the history of deals. Trump also, though he's like backed out of it at times, like for example, when facing with Ted Cruz wanted the total elimination of the deal, while Trump seemed to be more of a revision of the deal. Donald Trump, of course, an enigma figuring out what his actual stance is, but to remember that when he came to AIPAC, he bowed down and actually seemed non-Trump-like in the speech. Is that usually he's known for doing his speeches like a rally, no matter what the setting practically. Donald Trump is never really that formal, but however, the AIPAC himself looked presidential, and presidential as in swearing pretty much the vow to protect Israel at the cost of American lives, and that's what he did at AIPAC. And it's disgusting, as the talk pretty much going almost along the lines of no option off the table. Even with what he said at AIPAC, we all heard it, as saying that we're no longer going to treat Israel as second-class citizens, which is a very alarming thing to say when as much as America's already kissed their ass in previous years with Obama, who actually only, when it came to a vote in favor of Israel, I think that's what it was, he only abstained one time ever, unlike other presidents have done it more times than him. In fact, I think Reagan did it 10 times. However, it doesn't really signal being in favor or against Israel, the abstaining these votes. When it comes to American presidents, we know where they stand. However, Trump tried to say that Obama was anti-Israel or was not the best friend of Israel, and that Trump was going to right the ship with that. However, it's all theater. Obama, Trump, Romney, McCain, they're all on the same team. And, talk about McCain, and when it comes to Syria, is that McCain who met with ISIS, and we've seen that picture about 4 years ago with him meeting with Baghdadi, is that McCain now is, he's still in the Senate, and now this might be some of the last times we ever see McCain, as right now he's sick with brain cancer. This might be one of the last things, however, he might push is for the war in Syria against Bashar al-Assad. And he's been a neocon, a war hawk for his entire career. He got to the Congress, I think, in the 1980s. He's been there for like 30 years, and he's been one of the most recognizable war hawk faces that we can think of when we think of the war we think of the wars that have been pushed by politicians. Is that McCain's been notorious for pushing unnecessary wars, and he's been also, when it comes to Russia, he's pretty much labeled Vladimir Putin a bully, a killer, many other things. I'm surprised they let this guy in Russia one time. But John McCain is the mainstream neocon as it gets. And, he's definitely, people, and that's the thing that I've noticed from this whole, presidential cycle, is that 2016, everybody was saying, I missed the days when our party was insane or whatever. But it really, when it comes to the Republican Party, is that they were insane with McCain, the war hawk neocon that he was. Romney was pretty much talking about pushing towards world war with Russia. We had the Bush years, and the Democrats, the same thing, is that we had people like Kerry that you see as an ultimate war hawk, a neocon, who became the Secretary of State and was almost brought us to the point of war in Syria in Barack Obama's second term. He was a part of that. And, we've had these other candidates as well that, you can't think of really a time when there was actually a real, a candidate that actually, last time we actually had a Democratic that actually was opposed to the status quo was JFK, and he became the president. We all know what happened to that. A Republican, now you might have to think back all the way to the years of Taft, and that's really where it changed. 1913, when the Federal Reserve was enacted, which also, I believe, was the same year the FBI was enacted. The ADL was enacted, which people say, oh, well, you're against ADL, you must be anti-Semitic. But it's not really a organization that protects hate speech against Jews. It's an organization to, in the guise of that, to censor people, say that they're anti-Semitic, because I've seen them on many things that are not anti-Semitic really at all, called anti-Semitism. That you say something about Israel, they'll act like you called for the second Holocaust. It's absurd how the ADL acts and overreacts to normal statements, and because it's a censoring agency. And when they came about in 1913, along with the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve were at the helm of it was Rothschilds, and it just happens that these people are predominantly Jewish that are at the helm of these banking organizations. So it's very convenient in the guise of protecting all Jews. You make this organization that, if you make criticisms about who runs the Federal Reserve, now, no, it's not because you're mad about their actions. It's because you don't like Jews altogether, is what they'll say. The ADL, the FBI, all these organizations came about in 1913, which actually I just learned about recently. This is actually news to me. There was a very powerful speech actually I watched. And I don't really, I haven't paid too much attention. My years in researching and, being involved in the truth movement, now it's been almost, it's been 4 years or so since I've really been involved online in the truth movement, but I really haven't paid too much attention to Louis Farrakhan, who had a really powerful speech about the Rothschilds, and, it was a powerful speech about it. It was about 18, 19 minutes, and, I admit I don't have the longest attention span with stuff on the internet. People send me stuff. A lot of times they're hours long, and I never really get to watching it. However, I took the time to watch this, listen to this whole thing, 20 minutes of him talking about the Federal Reserve, and, he was talking also about Taft, I don't know how true it was, but he claimed that in 1912, to make sure that Taft wouldn't win again, they gave the challenge by Teddy Roosevelt, and that they financed Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. And because instead of having Teddy Roosevelt be the one that pushes the Federal Reserve Act, they wanted Woodrow Wilson to push the Federal Reserve Act, because it would look better coming out of a Democrat. And Woodrow Wilson, you think about all the terrible things that happened during his presidency. We had the Federal Reserve, we had World War I, Prohibition, all in his presidency. And even though Prohibition, I'll say, is a terrible thing, because it ultimately led to the rise of gangsters and people making tons of money off of bootlegging alcohol. And ultimately, the whole premise of it, the whole premise of Prohibition, is it's immoral. That the government, it seems that if the government banned something like that, when it banned alcohol, it led to people doing riskier alternatives. It led to people drinking bathtub gin, and also the government went to very extreme lengths to try to enforce Prohibition. There was a point where they even poisoned alcohol, and I think got a lot of people sick in order to try to discourage people from drinking. So even that, I'm going to say, was a terrible thing. But getting us into World War I, what really we could say was maybe our first wholly unnecessary war. We had no point in being that war, but through the lie of, and I would say it's almost like the equivalent of the lie of the Russia hacked the election. It's the equivalent of that lie was the lie of the Zimmerman telegram that supposedly Germany was trying to egg on Mexico to invade us, and ultimately that's what pushed us into war. And the Lusitania, which it was the 9/11 of its time, and it was a 9/11 type event because of the false flag nature of the Lusitania. If the Lusitania was a passenger ship that was crossing the Atlantic, the Germans gave warning to the people that were about to board that boat that they would sink that ship because, unlike what the American government was claiming, that there were just small arms pistols on the ship, which would be one thing, they had bombs on the ship. They had arms on the ship, and this is the way that they were bringing weapons across, and that the United States government was supporting the European allies such as the UK. Also, the British Navy had breaking through the German coding system. They knew the positions of the submarines across the Atlantic. They could have saved the lives of those people on board if they would have told the Americans that where the German submarine positions were, but they allowed it to happen. And also, because of those bombs, it also helped that ship sink a lot quicker. And that's why that ship took about a minute to sink, because they got hit by the torpedo and the bombs went off and the thing went straight down. And this happened in 1915, and this would be one of the major things that would lead America toward their involvement in the war. The Germans had warned publicly of this happening. Like, they were trying to tell that they didn't want this to happen, but it happened. And the German government got all the blame. The Kaiser, would later, they would depict Germany as like this beast, and the Kaiser as being this, monstrous creature and stuff like that. And we would get into World War I, and we would be there only about a year before the armistice, and then the notorious Treaty of Versailles was passed in 1919. And then after that, through from 1920 to 1923, the terrible era of inflation happened in Germany, and they went from, at one point, the Reichsmark being worth would be 4.3 of those to $1. By the end of that period, it was 4.3 trillion to $1. Their money had inflated so much that they're using it for firewood, they were using it for decoration. Their money was worthless at this point, practically. A lot of people ended up going back to pretty much the times of the Stone Age. And ultimately, really the period after the Kaiser fell in 1918, in the November of 1918, ever since that point, Germany's never totally recovered. Is that you had the Weimar Republic years, the weak years of Germany falling off the world stage and being a joke practically, and inflation and everything. Then Nazi Germany and the horrors that they experienced under that. Then the country being split in two and being controlled by one side by a Stalin-esque government, the East Germany, and an American puppet regime on the other side in West Germany. And nowadays, the country being ran by the joke of Angela Merkel. There's been no real great era of Germany ever since the Kaiser fell, almost a century ago. So that was a massive, that was pretty much the fall of Germany. Also happened in part by the fall of America, with America being corrupted and taken over by corporate, large banker interests, and now controlling the military. They helped bring down Germany, in my opinion. I think the Kaiser was not one of them, very likely, and he did make a mistake. One of his major mistakes the Kaiser did was help the Bolsheviks to take out the Russian government in order to try to win the war against Russia, which later the Kaiser did show regret, it appears. However, I think the Kaiser might have been freed the bankers. In the 1912s, a big election, it actually was split 4 ways. And there was also a man that probably would have opposed the Federal Reserve if he would have won, but he only got 8% of the vote, which was Eugene Debs of the Socialist Party, who talked about, one of his quotes is that he didn't want to rise through the ranks, he wanted to rise with the ranks, that he wanted to bring his common people up with him. Eugene Debs was kind of a statement of a lot of people in the country at that time, was that we had a lot of people of the left, a lot of socialists in the country, as we had like a little bit of a socialist movement, which later would kind of get phased out when we had the first Red Scare in the 1920s. But Teddy Roosevelt, he got like 26% of the vote, which ultimately, if his vote would have went to the other side, then it might, and if it wouldn't have been split by against Taft, then we might have not seen Woodrow Wilson's election. And Taft, he opposed a congressional amendment, I think it was, in order to, I think it was a congressional bill in order to pretty much install the Federal Reserve. So because he opposed it, they wanted to put their guy in, Woodrow Wilson. And that's why they barely disliked Taft. And it might be why Taft is kind of like seen as this, like, the only thing that, like, he's rarely even mentioned in history books, despite him being kind of a semi-recent president. We're not talking about one of those, like, 1830s, 1840s presidents that didn't really do anything. It was really the era of the Congress doing everything. However, Taft was past the turn of the century, but he's rarely mentioned in the textbooks. And the only thing that pretty much we know him in the textbooks for as Americans is being very heavily overweight. However, he seemed to have opposed the Federal Reserve, and being the last real president before that happened, I think that might be why Taft is kind of shunned from the textbooks. And Teddy Roosevelt, if it's true that the bankers backed Teddy Roosevelt in 1912, maybe that's perhaps why he gets this like badass kind of like a legend stance in our textbook, is that practically Teddy Roosevelt is seen as this guy that survived a shooting attempt in 1912. He's seen as this guy that was just an all-out, like almost like a Vladimir Putin of his time when it comes to this outdoorsy, tough leader, is how it's shown in our textbooks. However, he might have not been the strong, independent man that he was painted out in the textbooks as being. And I believe he opposed, I think he might have opposed the Glass-Steagall Act, which, despite the person who passed it, I think was a pretty good bill to try to break up monopolistic power, which was McKinley, who was ultimately assassinated himself in 1901. However, he was by no means a great president. I mean, he was responsible in part for the Filipino genocide that the Americans would commit during the Spanish-American War. He got us into the Spanish-American War, which was a war that, I'm going to say, at least we were largely had no part in. I'm not going to say we had totally no part in just because of the fact that its proximity to the United States, and there was probably a legitimate fear considering that we were still in the wake of European monarchies at the time, that that we could fear a Spanish invasion. And I think that's why I'm not, and they were right there at Cuba, and they could easily come up, but it was not quite to the point of being existential threat if the Spanish were not dealt with in Cuba and Puerto Rico. But the Spanish still, thinking back on the Spanish-American War, is that ultimately the war is based on pretty much a lie, because ultimately the USS Maine, and what appears the evidence is that we had no part in, or that the Spanish had no part in the USS Maine blowing up, but they try to claim through yellow journalism and sensationalist journalism that that the Spanish were involved with the blowing up of the Maine. However, it would seem to have actually been an accident. And it might have been, arguably, the first false flag that America committed against itself. And so, the whole legacy of McKinley as president's kind of shady in itself. And I look right now, I've actually got myself way off on a tangent, but it's, by the way, it's 4:55 right now, so we're about 5 minutes from the top of the hour. If anybody wants to call in, the call-in number is 845-277-9223. 845-277-9223 here at Voice of Brown Radio, here at UCY.TV. I'm your host, Chris J. Today here, by the way, it's Friday afternoon is when this is being recorded. For the people who are listening, Sunday night, the replay over at UCY.TV. And this also will be later archived to YouTube, for the people that catch it late, or just for the people that, if you don't watch the show altogether on either today, here Friday, or Sunday, it's on YouTube. You can catch any of the shows anytime, not just from that week, but we save the shows permanently. You can watch any show from the time that I came on to UCY.TV over 2 years ago. I came on to UCY.TV, and I've been on the radio, believe it or not, now for it's been about 4 years now that I've been on the radio. This November I've been on 4 years. I remember doing my first show. It was Thanksgiving break on my sophomore year of high school. Now I'm 19, and I've been out of high school 2 years. I graduated high school in 2015. It's kind of weird thinking back that it's been, that time went by that quickly. I was on the NWO Truth Radio to start off with, and I came over to UCY Radio after I was on Stable Old Radio for a long time, where this is where I'm airing. Stable Old Radio is not totally a dumb project. This is where actually I have like a blog talk radio station that I do the shows on, but UCY.TV is the main home. So it's like my old radio stations where, I'll air on Friday, and I just put the recording on to Sunday. By the way, I'm looking, because right now I pay Blog Talk Radio a decent amount per month in order to keep my Blog Talk Radio station open. I used to just be on there and somebody else used to pay for it. Well, when I first was on Stable Radio, there was a guy the people that originally founded the station, there was one of them paid for it. However, I'm looking for people, and I'll do it free of charge if you don't have to pay to be on Blog Talk Radio. I'm covering the cost on my Stable Radio station. I'm looking for people that a competent host that have their own program, perhaps, to put it on there. Just to fill up a lot of that empty air time that I could be using. That I'm paying for ultimately. If you want to put your show on here, you could hit me up, Chris Jackson Rojas, on Facebook, or you also. I'll put it out there. I'm also kind of looking for a co-host still. If you think you could join me up here at Voice of Gun Radio, and be pretty flexible in your timing, because recently I've been kind of getting more back into a set time, but I don't do. I used to be every Sunday, went live at 9:00 Eastern. I don't do that as much anymore now. I kind of like to record my shows prior to it. But, I used to do it on Friday. But if you're flexible on your time and everything, and you have more open availability than not, I guess you could would be one way of putting it, then hit me up. Definitely would be cool to have a co-host, because I think that radio is great solo. It's great doing my train of thought and going with my pace of things, but it's also but having two people inputting, two people talking about one topic and putting out what they know and teaching each other, it's definitely, I think it's a little bit different, a little bit better in many ways. And now I want to get back to the main topic of the show, which is the situation over in, I've talked a lot about the Venezuela situation, and, it's crazy how we're watching before our eyes the media put these lies about Venezuela and, this biased, unfair coverage that Maduro's government's getting about the situation over there. We all know that ultimately, these claims about Venezuela these are exaggerated, and they're trying to say that, they're comparing this like North Korea and stuff to Venezuela, and remember when Obama put the sanctions against Venezuela and claimed them to be a threat to national security? I thought that was absolutely ridiculous, because what threat do they have to American national security? They're not building WMDs. They're not, they're not selling uranium to rogue Pakistani tribesmen or something like that. No, it's that ultimately these people are a government right there that are done a major step into social development of their people, education, medicine, and they used oil profits to do that. And also we have to look at there's personal interest in Venezuela by the people that are supposedly in charge of this country. We have people like Rick Tillerson that his business in Venezuela was nationalized, ExxonMobil, and he demanded like a $10 billion payout to him when he was CEO, and Venezuela only gave him a $1 billion payout. So he was pretty mad about that he felt like he was shortchanged on that when it comes to the nationalization of ExxonMobil in Venezuela. There was a lot of nationalization that the oligarchs were mad about, and also a lot of the oligarchs do not want now. And that's why I think the Bolivarian Revolution didn't go far enough in some extent to nationalize everything. It was some of its economic moves were not far enough. It definitely had a change of culture in Venezuela, change of thinking in Venezuela, and definitely they ignited a change of thinking across the continent. The pink tide was not something that just involved Venezuela. It was something that involved the entire continent of South America. It was one little spark that sparked the bonfire that is the movement. Chavez and his dollars now potentially, I think that they might actually. Chavez's dollars may be candidates in 2018. That could be also another very popular set of women that could be might be in some kind of position to be in power next year. And I do believe, despite all of the negative press that the government's getting right now, that all the press against the Bolivarian Revolution, that in Venezuela, I think that the Bolivarian Revolution will continue past 2018. I think that 2018, the left wing will win. As long as they take on Nicolas Maduro, I'm pretty confident in that. And I think that the pink tide across South America is definitely going to continue. Despite that there's been some recent setbacks, what happened in Paraguay in 2012, what happened in Brazil last year, what happened in Argentina in 2015 with the election going to Macri, in Peru, an election going to the right wing, and in, I think I'm forgetting one. But I think Colombia, Colombia could be a major step. If Colombia picks the left-wing candidate next year, that could be a major showing of a move back towards the pink tide. South America moving back towards it. But I wouldn't say that it's over yet. As I think most of the continent is still left-wing lean. We still have Bolivia. We still have Ecuador. We have Venezuela. Chile's somewhat left-wing leaning. And we also have like the government of Nicaragua. We have Cuba, which has been always there as the kind of the center of the Latin American left. But we also have El Salvador. The pink tide is far from over in South America. So you also have the Dominican Republic, and I don't think they're going back to the days of Operation Condor anytime soon. As there's still enough people to remember the crimes that happened, and these despicable people like Klaus Barbie, who were aided by the United States government. The United States government helped the most despicable and nefarious of folk keep their power in these countries. And you had all these terrible dictators, and not just in South America. They did this. They propped up dictators around the world. In Africa, they propped up a dictator. They propped up dictators there. They propped up Suharto, one of the most violent dictators and one of the biggest countries on the planet. That people forget that in Indonesia, I think millions died under Suharto. Indonesia is one of the biggest countries on the planet, and they have, I think they're the fourth most populated country on the planet, and helped the fourth most populated country on the planet bring about a fascist dictator to be there 30 years. Behind the United States, China, and India, they're the most populated country on the planet. Is that with China having 1.7 million, I think, and then India, which is actually expected to be number one eventually, but they're like a 1.2 million or billion. The United States is about 320 million. I think Indonesia is about 250 million. Believe it or not, they have more people than Russia, and they helped them. They helped a fascist come to power there. $1.5 million. 1.5 million people. I mean, what was I talking about? I think it was. Oh yeah, I was thinking about China. It's like 1.5. I think it's like 1.7 million people live there. It's crazy to think about that. And then India is going to be up there soon. India at one point actually was kind of had kind of a left-leaning, person that sided with Tito and Nasser. At least he was part of their organization, which was against the Cold War in general, both sides of the Cold War, not just the United States side, but the Soviet side as well. The non-aligned movement. India was a part of it, and with President Nehru, they pretty much opposed both sides of the Cold War. But nowadays, you see that India seems to be hand in hand with Israel now. And President Modi, we saw, was meeting with Israel, and they seem to get along pretty well, Modi and Netanyahu. Right now, we see that I think that President Modi is driving a lot more Islamophobia in the country and trying to make their people scared of the Muslims. There's been this long-time animosity between India and Pakistan, which all over. To be honest, I'm not even sure what is really caused this extreme animosity. The religion, the territory. A lot of this. I know a big thing that caused a lot of tensions is the forgotten occupied area, Kashmir. That Kashmir in those, I think it's a Muslim area that's controlled by India. There's been a lot of people that have been killed and clashed throughout the years in Kashmir. I find that it's not the same Kashmir, however, that is mentioned in the song Kashmir, Led Zeppelin. I think that's what I'll talk about, place in Morocco. For the people that are wondering, I thought that for a while. I thought he was talking about Kashmir as in there over there by Pakistan. And we all know that song. It's like I actually say we all know that song, but probably a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people from my generation even know that song. It's one of the most. It's just got that unique sound, like Led Zeppelin. It's like otherworldly, about Led Zeppelin. I don't know. I get a little off topic, but just trying to make it a little music. By the way, people have been listening to my station long enough. They've been listening to Voice of Run Radio a while ago. Before UCY.TV, I kind of had like more free range to pick songs that I could because we at UCY.TV try to put nothing that's copyrighted. We use only music that we have rights to. that's why I have Immortal Technique now, and I have not used anybody different. I used to use Payday Monsanto, but I don't use like Guns N' Roses and stuff like that. But for people that used to listen, like back when I was on Stay Bold Radio, I would have Guns N' Roses playing. I would have I don't know. I don't think we had any Led Zeppelin songs on there. We had Ozzy on there. Like I remember playing War Pigs. A lot of times this is about the time like I'd play War Pigs. It'd be like halfway through the show. I play it and I get like a nice 7-minute intermission in there. I'd play War Pigs for that point. I remember playing also. Who else did I play? I think it was like another rock. Somebody else rock that I used to play. Shit, is it Aerosmith? You know, that's like my type of music. Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, Van Halen, all that type of stuff. I don't really like listening to like the modern music too much. I would put on Payday Monsanto as well. You know, that's a couple. I think that most of the songs that I was using at the beginning of UCY.TV, my time here at UCY.TV, I was using Payday Monsanto. I was using two Payday Monsanto songs. I think I was using the Complex. I really like that Payday Monsanto song, and was it another one I was using? I don't know. Maybe it was Tel Aviv Steve, which that's one of my favorites. Because it's just like the whole jam of it and like the lyrics to it. If you're listening to it, it's just great. I haven't had Payday. You know, it's weird thinking I haven't had Payday Monsanto here in over 3 years now. It was last week, 3 years ago, is when I had Payday Monsanto. It was at the end of July 2014. I had Payday Monsanto over here. Just kind of, thinking back to 2014, I remember one of the main things I was trying to do back then. I was trying to recruit Jim Mars over here to Voice Rebellion Radio. Back then it was still Revolution Radio. I was trying to get him. I was emailing him and all kinds of stuff like that. It kind of sucked to see that last night, or no, was it 2 nights ago? I think it was 2 days ago. Yeah, he passed on. Jim Mars, a Texan conspiracy icon. I've seen him on, we've seen him on the History Channel. He's wrote multiple books. I mean, he was somebody that was big in the conspiracy theories and everything before it was even on the internet. He's like one of the original, one of the big giants of the conspiracy theorist movement, I guess you could say. Even though I don't like using that word because they use that to discredit the JFK assassination questioners. But however, Jim Mars, nonetheless, I think he deserves a shout out for his career in the Truther movement, and hopefully, I have to say prayers for his family. And I know Jim Mars is probably in a better place now. A lot of people tried to say that Jim Mars was. I remember there were some people trying to say that he was a shill or something like that. I don't know. I do kind of question that. I don't feel like Mars was ever to the point like Jones, that he was big and he was spreading the disinfo. And I question also, I'm going to say I'm slightly questionable of people like, David Icke, who seems to be, I don't know, when you start talking about space lizards from Mars and shit like that, it makes us all as truthers discredited, and regular people get turned off, rather than asking legitimate questions about geopolitical quandaries and JFK assassination holes in the whole story and stuff like that. You want to talk about how there's lizard men living amongst us that change in shapes and stuff like that. The whole talk about reptilians and it's like David Icke's specialty. And David Icke, it's the funny thing is he's out of all like the people in the Truther media, and I think maybe perhaps even more than Jesse Ventura, he seems to know what he's talking about the most when it comes to geopolitics. However, he starts talking about the lizard men, and I'm immediately turned off. I can't follow him when he's talking about the reptilians and stuff like that. Plus, also his other crazy antics he's had over the years. We know a couple of them. Like the he had remember that the whole area he was wearing like the weird turtlenecks and stuff like that. Apparently gave him like spiritual energy. And, I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I can't support someone that calls himself the Son of God. There's no real proof of that. I mean, I think he claimed that, didn't he, at one point in the 90s? I don't know. I'm not going to say much more on what I don't know, like, for a fact, because I'm not just going to be here to gossip about, different people, but my little 2 cents on that. Venezuela, though, it's really it's starting to happen. It's like that Rob Paul meme. It's happening. Was Trump calling them a dictatorship? It's all starting to set the stage. I could see soon that Trump saying, "Look, time for the huge. It's gonna be the great, beautiful invasion of Caracas. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be beautiful. We're gonna invade. It's gonna be the invasion of Venezuela. I'm gonna build a giant shrimp casino over Caracas, and I'm gonna take out." And he probably, I don't know, for a part of the exaggeration, I feel like I butchered his name. It's like instead of him saying Emmanuel Macron for the president of France, it's Emmanuel Macaroni of France. And it was a pretty weird gaffe that he had with the French president's wife. Where he says, "Oh yeah, you're in such great physical shape." I'm like, damn, Trump. It's like, right in front of your own wife. But I don't know. You asked me the whole thing about a 64-year-old lady with a 39-year-old man, and the 39-year-old man's the one that's actually powerful and rich, but yet he picked the 64-year-old lady. It's weird in any circumstance, but when you think that they've known each other, I think that that was his teacher when he was 15, so that means she was 40 then. It's weird, pretty much at any angle you look at it, but that's what it is. And unfortunately, instead of Le Pen there, which I believe that right now Western Europe would be on track to a more peaceful relationship with Russia, and perhaps the whole world, may with Western Europe now being more peaceful towards Russia, that perhaps there'd be more pressure not to push these sanctions against Russia from the United States. However, Le Pen's not there, and the media was able to win their war and paint Macron as the next president of France and try to paint Le Pen as a racist and a xenophobe and many other things, even though in my opinion is that Le Pen was no Trump. I think she made that kind of clear. She has to distance herself, I think, from Donald Trump. But that's what people were making the comparisons to, is that they're trying to say that Le Pen was like a French Trump. I'm really hoping that next European country doesn't go the same way as France, and I don't know when the next one's going to be facing a big election like that. But it was pretty disappointing to see Le Pen lose this year, and I think she was a true nationalist for France. I don't think she was a fascist. I don't think she was a hateful person. But I think maybe Spain with Podemos, that might be the next thing, is that maybe perhaps we'll see Spain vote in Podemos, and that'd be a major Western European country opposing this push against Russia that Western Europe has been doing. But, there's been some resistance, it seems like, in Western Europe against the sanctions from the United States. We've had almost unanimously, the United States pushed these major sanctions against Russia, 98-2. I think the only people that were against it were, I think it was Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders. That was it. They were the only people that opposed the sanctions in the Senate. And I think the people opposed it in the Congress. However, pretty much unanimously they voted for it. And also, I think the sanctions are passed against, I think, Russia as well. I don't know. It was also, I think, also like Iran. Syria might have been involved in it, or Iran and China. And Tulsi Gabbard voted for it, I think. The person that was claiming that she was against terrorism in Syria, but if you vote for sanctions against Iran, you're voting against Iran's ability to fight terrorism in Syria. Because Iran has been one of the major people fighting terrorism in Syria. They've been one of the major fighters against ISIS in Syria. However, we continue to see this United States effort to try to derail Iran's efforts in Syria to defeat terrorism. And it proves that the United States is not really committed to fighting terrorism in Syria. They're committed to their own interest, and they're committed to their own interest of supporting terrorism, as we've seen. It's not accidental that they're dropping supplies to ISIS. It's not accidental that Israel's been caught on film training ISIS. It's not been accidental that there's audio recordings of the United States collaborating with ISIS prior to their attack in October 2016. They've attacked multiple times the Syrian military. And it favored ISIS. And also, let's not forget that at one time ISIS attacked Israel, and they apologized for it. There's all the evidence seems to show this collaboration. The Middle East is, ever since the United States supported the Mujahideen in the 1980s, has been a mess. And Mujahideen is the parent of all modern terrorism in the Middle East. The United States created modern terrorism in the Middle East, and the British made the ideology for modern terrorism in the Middle East, which is Wahhabism, which is a perverted, tainted version of Islam that ultimately is much different than what the Quran preaches for Muslims to act like. You know, people think that the Quran is inherently violent. It's actually Wahhabism. It's the tainted version of Islam. It's mainly peddled by the so-called our so-called ally, Saudi Arabia, which Saudi Arabia known to be one of the biggest exporters and financiers of terrorism in the world, yet we support them. And they've claimed, that's another long extent they try to make about Venezuela. They try to claim that Venezuela backed terrorism. They try to say that Venezuela, and, no, they claimed that, okay, this is what they said. I think they said Venezuela backed Hezbollah. And I'll say this on the air, and I don't care, you know, what are they going to do about it? What is the government going to do about it for me saying this? Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. It's a political wing of an ideology against foreign influence of Lebanon and across the Middle East, an anti-Zionist movement, predominantly Shia-based. It is religious in nature, and there's a military wing to it, but I would not call it a terrorist group. And they are a legitimate political group that actually has a lot of influence over in Lebanon. And some people say that the Hezbollah's military might actually be bigger than the Lebanese military themselves. They are not a terrorist group. They're not a terrorist group like Al-Qaeda. They're not a terrorist group like ISIS. They are a legitimate political group. But people have tried to make this this connection. They're trying to say that Iran's support of Hezbollah is like them backing ISIS, but it's not. And they try to say that Venezuela is connected to Hezbollah. I see this I think I don't know what they try to say, but I think they try to say something all along the lines that there might have been narco trafficking connected to terrorism or whatever. But ultimately, the people that actually have used narco trafficking dollars for shady or unknown or for weird sources in the Middle East, remember Iran-Contra scandal. The United States did that in the 1980s, using drug trafficking money probably from the Contras. They were using cocaine. I don't know. They were selling missiles to give money to the Contras, but there's also cocaine involved. It was a whole fucking mess. And, that's for people that want to look back fondly at the 1980s and say, oh, if Reagan was here, it would be totally different. No, Reagan was one of that era was one of the worst when it came to the United States and what its effects on the future and what we did then. Bringing up terrorists in the Middle East was, helping people like Bin Laden get to the point they are today. It was far from any kind of great era when it came to what our government was doing. And Ronald Reagan, we just remember one thing, is that Ronald, 6 letters. Wilson, 6 letters. Reagan, 6 letters. And that seemed to be pretty indicative of the type of behavior that Reagan exhibited during his time of presidency, is that he came off, it's like what described in the Bible as the Antichrist as being, charming and is coming off as very likable. Behind the scenes, he's wreaking havoc. He's stirring up shit. And this is not me directly saying that Ronald Reagan was the Antichrist. However, if there's already been a personification of the Antichrist that's already came to Earth, Ronald Reagan might have been that person. Ronald Reagan was a total shithead, and what he did in Latin America, what he did in the Middle East, I mean, across the world, the Reagan administration, and of course it wasn't him, ultimately. I don't think the bankers were probably, in charge of Ronald Reagan. However, what happened during the Reagan administration were some of the worst acts that the American government ever committed overseas. Also during that point, Operation Condor was still going on in South America. We almost got to the brink of World War III with Russia. The confrontation it was like the total opposite of Kennedy. He was trying to stall out the Cold War. He was trying to work with Khrushchev towards ending the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Reagan was going right for the horns and almost brought us to the point a couple times in 1984, 1985, towards nuclear war with the Soviet Union, the total destruction of the human species. And now, it's weird is that nowadays we're back to the same kind of like McCarthyist, Cold War fear stories. How tense it is with Russia right now. It hasn't been like this since about 1984. And would it be coincidental? Well, 1983 is when we had the Grenadian invasion. What if Venezuela, this is going to be the mark of that, is the Venezuelan invasion, which will cause more tensions, and it'll be very similar to 1983 all over again. Seems like history's repeating itself. However, this time, instead of the corrupt Soviet government, they have Vladimir Putin in charge right now. So I think it's going to be, this might be dealt with a little bit differently. Soviet government was going through like a transition period at that point, as their leaders just pretty much kept dying off, or at least the people who made them were just figureheads there. But is that Brezhnev died in 1982. You had Andropov died in 1984. Konstantin Chernenko died in 1985, and then Gorbachev took over. And we know that Gorbachev pretty much oversaw the country, the overseeing, I guess you could say. Now the country going from the Soviet control to the mafia control, because it's pretty much what happened in the 1990s, is that pretty much the mafia took over Russia and became practically a mafia state for the next few years until Vladimir Putin would take over. The 90s would end up being a disaster for Russia, and as it went to Yeltsin, pretty much, I guess you could say it was almost like the dawn of Russia during the 1990s. The corruption that happened there then, as it was a pro-Western country, was unspeakable. And many people died of starvation with the shock therapy treatment that they oversaw. Now, I'm not going to say that the Soviet Union was a great country or that the Soviet Union, but the way that the Soviet Union was brought down, and what they turned it into, what the bankers turned it into the mafia state in the 1990s, was despicable. The mafia, by the way, people that don't know, is just the brutality of the Russian mafia is incredible. I mean, it's one of the most brutal organizations on the planet, and they make like they make like the mobsters you see in the movies seem like they make them look like drama teachers or something like that when it comes to their toughness. Is that these people are way more tougher, the Russian mafia, than what we picture as mobsters. And it was terrible. It was a terrible year for the Russians in the 1990s. However, now they have a real leader, Vladimir Putin. And the last 17 years, the country's seen some incredible growth, and I think will continue if they re-vote him in next year. He has some opponents, but if Vladimir Putin's to run, he's almost guaranteed to win again. They have ultimately his opponents might have at most about 10% support. I think that they have less of a chance this time around than they had in 2012. I think some people might have some cold feet about voting him in again. This time they know that he's done great jobs in this, despite all the challenges in this term. Last time Zyuganov held the biggest chance of defeating Putin, but he had only like 17% of the vote. Zaganov almost won in 1996. However, ever since then, Zaganov fell out of relativity. You have also Zarnowski, who his best chances in 92 running against Yeltsin. But in 96, the United States government admitted pretty much to interfering with the Russian election to bring in Yeltsin again. So they're talking about how the Russians may have influenced our elections, but they've admitted to influencing their elections in 1996, where they kept Don Yeltsin one more term, but he resigned anyways in 1999. And it's possible that they might have interfered with both elections, 1992 and 1996. Then in 2000, I think, was the next election until Vladimir Putin won. Putin would win again in 2004. And I think Putin would stay. I don't know when. I think he faced him maybe late 2008 or something like that. I think when he went out for 4 years, and Medvedev came, and then now they're 6-year terms. They can only face 2 consecutively. So, like, if Putin is to run again this time and he wins again, Putin will leave in 2024 then. And I think I don't see Putin coming back after that. Putin would probably retire, being one of the most legendary Russian statesmen in history, one of the most legendary Russian presidents in history. I mean, he might be at that point literally like a top 5 in the entire long 1,200-year history of Russia. He would be about one of the top 5 leaders of all time. I think that puts him. I think that after this presidency, that will put him above. That could put him above, like even like the Tsar Alexander II, who freed the serfs, and also, past Tsar Alexander, the one that won the Napoleonic Wars. I think it was Alexander that won the Napoleonic Wars. There's Tsar Nicholas I, I think, was the one that won the Crimean War. I think I know my 1800 czars, but I don't really know prior to that. I just know there's like, I don't know the 17. It's like there's been so many czars in history of Russia. Ivan Terrible, Catherine the Great. Of course, I know that the more recent ones, like there's Nicholas II, the last czar of Russia in 1918. Believe it or not, just less than a century ago, or 1917, a little over a century ago, there was still a czar in Russia. Some people say in some ways Vladimir Putin is continuing in the inspiration of the czars. Also, there's another country that America often claims as a dictatorship is Belarus, and they're pretty independent. Lukashenko, he's been the leader there for about 25, 26 years, and Lukashenko may not be the best leader, but however, he opposed the shock therapy that the Western economic advisors were suggesting for the former Soviet Union. I think it worked out pretty well for Belarus, and they have a union with Russia, like an economic union with Russia, I believe, and now I think they're part of the Eurasian Union, which is like the new economic union for a few of the ex-Soviet countries, and Belarus has done it right. Look at that. It's kind of a country you don't hear about much, actually. Some people have tried to say that it's a continuation. It's a country frozen in the old Soviet ways. I kind of disagree with that. I think Lukashenko was one of the few people that voted. Though he was one of the few people that voted against Belarus's independence from the Soviet Union. But the way that the country's ran is not communist economics, and I would not say that there's there was the repression of the church in the Soviet Union that does not exist in Belarus. There's a couple countries I think they try to put that on, that it's a continuation of the Soviet Union. This is this is like the thing that they always try to make people scared of when it comes to Russian influence. They try to make it seem like this is the return of the Soviet Union. They say this about Transnistria as well, which is also, I guess you could say, it's a kind of a semi-failed project a split off from Moldova, a country that wanted to split off from Moldova. It's kind of like it's pretty much in a frozen conflict right there. And Transnistria is ultimately some people, they try to say it's like it's a little piece of Soviet Union still left. And in some ways, yeah, by nostalgia and everything, the country and how it still looks, in many ways it looks like the old Soviet Union looked. I don't think there's the rules that the Soviet Union had. However, they still do use the hammer and sickle on their flag. But it's like one of those countries that's barely recognized. Only a few countries recognize it, but I think they do self-govern. It's a tiny sliver of land in Moldova, which is a small country in itself, but I think they're pro-NATO, so it's like the major split is that they're pro-Russian and a pro-NATO country. But Moldova is tiny in itself. There's also, there's a few other countries like in Eastern Europe that have kind of fallen into frozen conflicts like that, like Azerbaijan is there's a country like Nagorno-Karabakh or something like that that's split off of them. That's also they're kind of in a frozen conflict as well. They've been wanting independence for a long time. However, it doesn't look like they're going to get independence anytime soon. It looks like a lot of these countries just remain only recognized by a few countries. Georgia, the Georgia War, which is one of the biggest it was one of the biggest moves towards the point of where we are right now with American-Russian relations. From 2008, when Russia and Georgia went to war, it ultimately, America backed Georgia and the madman Saakashvili, and Russia backed the separatists in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and eventually Russia won the war, but it pretty much pushed us just one more step closer to the Cold War with Russia. I think that might have been one of the huge turning points, really, when it came towards the Cold War #2, and that's why I characterize these times. This is Cold War II with Russia. We're the closest we've been since 1980s, probably, towards nuclear war with Russia, and sort of feeling of peace that we might have had at one point has went away. Now it's tenser than ever, and I would say potentially, I'd say maybe tenser than the most points of the Civil War. I mean, this is about as tense as there's been points in this recent couple of years, the fallout with Russia, that have been the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Georgian War. That was the first, I guess, war that America and United States were directly on other sides of. Is that America backed the madman Saakashvili, Russia backed the separatists, and now we see that again in Ukraine. Is that America backed the madman Poroshenko, who Saakashvili actually went to Ukraine to be a governor, and then the United States backs the Russia backs the separatists in Donbass, Lugansk, where the war's still going on. They had a flare up recently. I don't know what's exactly the deal right now up there, if it's settling down or not. But this war's been going on for over 3 years, and it's been almost all my time on the radio. This war's been going on, and now a lot of people have been affected by it. Now that we're almost at 5:40 right now here on the East Coast, it's about 2:40. We're on the West Coast live right now. Anybody that wants to call in, give some thoughts. It's going to be 845-277-9223, 845-277-9223 here at Voice of Rebellion Radio. Here we are at UCY.TV, and by the way, here we're also at Stabled Radio on blogtalkradio.com. This is Chris J. here on Friday afternoon. I was going to talk about Iran because that's in the title of the show. Is that Iran? So Trump's comments, and I saw this. I think I saw it somewhere that Trump said that they're going to break the nuclear deal by October. And the nuclear deal that Trump has for a long time lambasted. He's called it one of the worst deals in history. He says that he's going to totally rewrite the Iran deal, and he said that he's called it us giving them money. I don't think that we're actually giving Iran money. I think he's talking about sanctions that they are not experiencing and not, having that money taken from them. through sanctions. The way talk about giving them $150 billion a year. Ted Cruz, who went on an even harder line stance of saying that we're going to rip up the Iran deal. Pretty much it seemed like it was about a lot bowing down to Israel in the 2016 election. Big surprise. The APAC, we saw Trump, I think that was one of the major things we talked about was the Iran deal. He also, of course, one of the big things was this idea that we're going to support Israel even more heavily. And Israel, they come into play as they've been saying for the last 30 years that Iran is 6 months away from a nuclear weapon. And there's no proof that Iran's ever built a nuclear weapon, that they are building nuclear weapons, but there is proof that Israel has been assassinating nuclear scientists in Iran as they've meddled into many countries' affairs over the years. We shouldn't be talking about Russian intelligence meddling in other countries. We should be talking about the Israeli intelligence meddling in other countries. But Iran, even if they were building a nuclear weapon, I think that we shouldn't even give them any shit about that, because Israel has got a nuclear weapon. They got their nuclear weapons illegally in the 1960s. They never signed on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So Iran, there's a big hypocrisy. Israel can have their nuclear weapons illegally, but Iran can't. Also, Israel's got all these nuclear weapons. They got 411 pointing at all different corners of the world, and they got Pakistan, another American ally, who got nuclear weapons, but Iran can't have nuclear weapons to defend themselves. And Pakistan got nuclear weapons. It was part of they tried to put pressure on Russia back in the Soviet Union, and it was also because they were a fascist dictatorship, really in support of the United States at that time. And I still think that Pakistan is pretty much in support of the United States. They have also nuclear weapons, believe it or not. So Iran apparently can't have nuclear weapons, and their military is large. That's what threatens, I think, the United States. Because they know that the United States is to go in there. That's going to be like 15 Iraqs. I mean, this is a military that knows what they're doing. This would not be a small affair. And I think Trump, I don't know if he's like wading his feet into the water, seeing where Americans feel about this, because this is a big deal. A war with Iran could kill millions of Americans. I mean, because it would result in a world war. Syria would get involved. Israel's going to be involved. The entire Middle East would fall into conflict. And 500,000 Americans died in World War II. The kind of conflict this could create, I could see, major losses like that, where it would take millions of Americans to go in there, and millions of Americans would die. The type of weapons that exist today, we've seen Trump pretty much put his dick on the table when he dropped that Moab on Afghanistan. And, that was the largest weapon that had ever been used in combat ever since the use of the atomic weapons in Japan. The Moab is pretty much almost like if you haven't seen the footage of that thing going off, you should check it out. But if those things start getting used, it's not even going to nuclear warfare. And imagine that's a gigantic warfare if those are used. All these different conventional warfare weapons that have been created since World War II that they have now being used in a war of the scale would be horrific. Iran and the United States are pretty close to war, it looks like. In Syria, even though there was like this little detente because of this ceasefire that was signed between Russia and the United States a little bit ago, more sanctions have been passed. More sanctions have been passed against Iran. It seems like every time there seems to be like peace and there's going to be a detente for a while, a couple of weeks later, the Trump administration pushes us closer to the war, which is not really the Trump administration, but it's the bankers, the corporations that are on top pulling the strings. And you look at who's in charge of this government. And, one of the biggest things, the military-industrial complex, and how much weapons we have. Is that ultimately they continue to make more and more weapons because war is necessary for the business. And every time that's why they're going to help push for war. When we almost got to war, remember back 4 years ago, everybody was talking about how we were almost at war with Syria. and we almost got to the point with Obama announcing strikes in Syria. Raytheon stocks went through the roof, and it was a really tense period. A lot of people thought that we were going to World War III, and I think now they've just kind of like eased their way in. But it looks like this might be it. This fall might be it. I mean, we've been already this summer. It's already like the first strikes have happened, but Syria never really responded. And Israel and Syria were going at it for about a week, actually. It looks like the whole time of the other countries not getting involved in Syria is over. The only thing I question is whether Russia will show restraint and not get involved because they are afraid of a global war that would result from that, or will they have to just watch Iran and Syria fight out against the United States, which I recommend, that they try to show as much restraint as possible and not get involved if it comes down to that. Because I think the Iranian military could potentially hold off the American military. We'll have to see. I feel like the tide is totally turned against the Western countries and the countries of the bankers. It feels like nowadays the world is awakening to that. And they're starting to take some big losses in South America, the Middle East, for example, where Iraq, a country that they wanted so hard to turn into an American colony, has now became an ally of Syria and Iran. And that's really weird. Iraq and Iran being allies is something that's not that common. I mean, they went to a very bloody war in the 1980s where millions of people died. This is one of the biggest wars I could think of in the 20th century. And the Iraq-Iran war, which the United States helped Saddam invade Iran in the 1980s, is when we were still friends with Saddam. And the people forget that Saddam and the United States were friends for an entire decade before the war of 1991 happened, the Gulf War, that ultimately then it changed and sanctions in the past, and then it was like kind of an easement of relations until the 2003 invasion. Now Iraq and Iran are friends, though, and they're helping to squash ISIS across the Middle East. And Iraq, also Syria, it's like a triple alliance there. And perhaps this is kind of like the new triple alliance. You remember they told you in school about the triple alliance, about World War I. You had Austria-Hungary, Germany, Ottoman Empire. Well, maybe this is like the new triple alliance to repel U.S.-Israeli invasion. It's going to be Iraq, Iran, Syria. Could be. It's kind of a prediction. I don't think Russia and China really get involved just to prevent global war at this point. I see it may way down the road of direct conflict between Russia and the United States, but I'm just saying I don't see it happening now. Not with Putin in charge. Putin doesn't want any part of it. I can tell. He's too well versed in history, and I think that when it comes to the fact that there's still a lot of people that remember total war when Nazi Germany invaded Russia, is that there's a lot of people that still fought it. They are still alive and fought it. They're now in their 90s. Since there's people that still remember that Russia's a little bit more harsher toward the side to get total war with the United States. And, that's the difference between the United States and Russia in World War II, is that the war came to Russian soil in World War II. Their cities were sieged on. They had the siege of Leningrad. They had the siege of Moscow. The United States didn't have that happen. We didn't have a siege of Washington, D.C. We did have, Nazis land on a couple shores a couple times, and they were, immediately caught during the war. But there was no, and they weren't even, planning on invading. They were, looking for ways to sabotage. It wasn't like it was part of an invasion. The Nazis came in big droves towards Russia, but they invaded, and they went in there, and it was winter, and they couldn't handle it. Because the Russian winter is nothing like no other country's winter. The Nazis even, from Germany, it was a little too much for them. And they ultimately got pushed out. And also, let's remember that points, the Nazis were outnumbered 12-1. The Soviets had a gigantic military force, and that's ultimately pretty much was the deciding factor. So Trump looks like he's encroaching on Iran as well. So what ultimately seems to be happening is that Trump is taking a tougher stand. Even though that earlier, back when he was campaigning, he was talking about working towards peace with Russia, and that we're going to ease the relations with Russia. However, he seems to be wanting to put pressure on Russia's closest allies, Iran and Venezuela. two of their closest allies. And really, I can't think of much closer allies. You think about the other ones, like around the world, they're not as big players really. Of course, there's like Bolivia, countries like that, but they're not as big players as like Venezuela. Also Trump's put some pressure on Cuba, as we've seen. Made that speech, the anti-Cuban speech in Florida, I think back in June, where he was pretty much announced there was going to be more travel restrictions. He's also put more attention on North Korea, which is somewhat a Russian ally, and has done the travel restrictions towards North Korea, which a lot of people who are listening would say, well, North Korea is a horrible totalitarian state. They deserve that. However, remember that a lot of the news that's been reported about North Korea is fake news that's being pushed by CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They've been reported as fake. Sometimes these things are actually just pretty much racist that are being put out about North Korea. There's obviously imperfections about North Korea, but North Korea is quite different, I think, from what if people were actually see it in person and what the media is showing it to be. It might not be a country you'd want to live in, but it's not this horrible nightmare state that's controlled by the Sith Lord Kylo Ren that's being shown on the media. No, it's a little bit different than that, I would think. Venezuela and Iran, the ones I'm focusing on. Now, I've really laid out in the show about Venezuela. This is absurd what's being peddled. The hypocrisy, the whole label them a dictatorship. And Iran, they try to say that they back Saudi Arabia. This is the country that actually does all the things they try to accuse Iran of doing. They try to say that that people of that are not Muslim in Iran are punished. That's Christians, even Jewish people live peacefully in Iran. I also don't believe that they. I think that's exaggerated. I think there's local cases where people like they're homosexuals are punished with death in Iran. However, I think that there's. I don't think that all gays, like if you say that you're openly gay in Iran, that you're immediately assassinated or whatever. Iran's a democracy. When's the last time you've heard of elections in Saudi Arabia? They had just an election in May in Iran, and they voted in Rouhani. They're about to have in their swearing-in ceremony where Rouhani is going to be sworn in for a second term. He's been the president since 2013 when we had Ahmadinejad was the president of Iran. And it's what seems a little bit different about this time. Remember, there was this big encroachment towards Iran during Obama's first term. As his first term wind down in 2012, there was all this talk about World War III with Iran. And, I think it was about the time where Netanyahu showed his big bomb drawing of that Iran was, at this stage of getting the nuclear weapon, which still hasn't happened yet. There's no proof that Iran, and they're still trying to go along that lines. And I remember it's like Ted Cruz, with the sensationalist things that he said in the debate. He was trying to say, the Ayatollah is building nuclear weapons to kill millions of people, millions of Americans with. It's not true. They've tried to also show the Ayatollah as this evil, figure that is just bent on the destruction of the West. When how I see it is just a religious figure that seems to be looking out for the religious integrity of his country, and also probably mostly for the best of his country. I think that in many ways is way less selfish than many leaders around the world, as he seems to be devoted to religious means rather than things about money and about wealth. He seems to be a pretty humble man that he's not really thinking about self-image. He thinks about the religious morality of the country. But it's definitely somewhat a semi-theocracy. However, it's a lot better than Saudi Arabia. And I think that Iran, with their progress that they've had for women in their country compared to Saudi Arabia, and also the fact that how they have a pretty open freedom of expression there compared to other countries. I think that Iran is one of the models of the Middle East, and also by the fact that they were able to kick out the Rothschilds and that they don't have debt like us, our country, that's $20 trillion in debt to the Rothschilds and other bankers. Well, it's not all to them, but a lot of it's to them, and that's by design. Iran's a lot better off than we are in those regards. Well, as we're wrapping up the show, I think we've learned a couple lessons about the future of this situation when it comes to the United States' foreign policy, and that the United States is nearing I think they're going to pick a target. There's like right now 3 countries that are really on the radar. You have North Korea, you have Iran, and you have Venezuela. And right now it seems that this period that we're about to see is that it's going to be the targeting of Russia's allies. And I think they're going to take Russia's strongest ally, Iran, which has, is kind of weird also because not that long ago Iran wasn't one of Russia's strongest allies. In fact, they were one time when they were Soviet Union, Iran labeled them as the lesser Satan, as they labeled America the greater Satan. However, Iran seems to be right now under the radar, and I think potentially within just 2 months, we may be seeing some kind of confrontation between the United States and Iran. As Trump continues to act as a neocon, and this man that we thought was going to, in his words, make America great again, seems to be hell-bent on bringing America closer towards World War III, and seems to be, ultimately is a figurehead for the bankers as he also, looking to cause more division in the country. The split between black and white, split between Latin and white, the split between Christian and Muslim, the split between upper class, middle class, lower class, tearing this country apart by the fabrics. And, ultimately made this is just really what Trump seems to be is that the ugly face of imperialism has shown itself again. Is that for years there, as we had, we've had kind of what seemed to be a more, at least I guess the world, a little bit more kinder face, I guess, as Obama, even though it was ultimately the same thing was being done, the same mission was being done by the people really in charge. And now Trump, the ugly face, has shown itself again. And it's, I guess you could say, I guess you could say that, it's almost like a good cop, bad cop thing. Now the bad cop's been shown. By the way, all the people that listen today, thanks for tuning in to Voice Rebellion Radio here at Stabled Radio, and we'll be replayed at UCY.tv, and the people that are listening on UCY.tv, all of you have a good night, and everybody's listening here. Thanks for coming on this afternoon here at Voice Rebellion Radio. If you haven't got a chance yet, subscribe to my Facebook page, Voice of Rebellion, or not Voice of Rebellion, Chris Jackson Rojas. Facebook, I do podcasts there occasionally, try to get more followers. You can, by the way, on Facebook, you don't have to send a friend request. You just go to follow, subscribe, and you get my notifications and everything. I'm trying to keep, I never was shooting for, it's like, I think I could have gotten close to the 5,000 mark if I was looking for it. But however, I'm not even really looking to get to the 5,000 friends mark. I'm more just trying to keep my little, around 600 and not really go past that. I feel like anything past that's going to be kind of unmanageable. There's all kinds of people on my friends list all the time that are totally forget are even on there. I might actually try whittling it down from that, to be honest. A lot of the people I try to include on my Facebook page are like former, friends from high school, people that I knew in high school, trying to not really talk to people that already know what's going on, but try to get people to figure out what's going on. Venezuela, I'm going to keep an eye on this. The Constituent Assembly and its process of going on, this could be interesting. We'll see what they actually put on the new constitution of Venezuela. I'm sure that, right now the voting system, Smartmatic, that did the election, they got pressured into, I think, by the United States into saying that this is like discrepancies in the vote or whatnot. Of course, I'm not going to trust what I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure if it's an American voting system, but if it is an American voting system, I'm definitely not going to trust what they have to say. But I'm not going to trust what this random voting system company is going to say about the Constituent Assembly vote. I believe that it was 100% legitimate, like previous elections. I mean, even one of America's own, Jimmy Carter, said that the Venezuelan elections are totally legitimate, as he said, I think, with the 2004 presidential election. when Chavez was elected when he was elected for a third term, I think was the one that he said this is it was the recall referendum. He said this is a legitimate form of voting. They do electronic vote and they do a paper vote in Venezuela. By the way, everyone, I'm going to be wrapping up here. It's been 2 hours.